Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and for joining us today. We're really excited to have everyone in this space so that we can hear some of the exciting practice that's happening over at our Child and Family Service Agency up in the north, presented today by Mary T.G. Gray and Joan Conlone. We're really excited to have them both here, and we will be starting in a couple minutes, and we'll have our elder Deb Foxcroft open us up in a prayer and get us started in a good way before we jump in today. Deb, if you're ready, we can turn the floor over to you.
Sure. Can you see me?
Yes, we can see and hear you perfectly. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone, and good morning. Appreciate the invitation. Sounds like it's going to be a wonderful webinar that we're all going to be watching today. Just good morning, and I just wanted to say it's a good day to have a good day. And I'm coming from the Fishhut First Nation unceded territory in Sumas First Nations. I'm Deb Foxcroft, and I'm the elder advisor for the society. And I also am a mom and a wife and an auntie, an elder, and a mother and a grandma. And I am here coming from and working in my own, at home in my own territory and on our land, and just wanted to welcome you to our territory and just acknowledge all of the other territories that are here doing this very important work on behalf of our children. Excited to hear from Mary T.G. Gray and Joan from Carrier Sekani. So I just want to start and say, Creator, Great Spirit, we ask that you come here with an open mind and an open heart, and that your spirit is open also for today's work. And as we do this important work and sacred work for our children, youth, families, today and every day, I also ask that we walk together. Let's make this path, this healing path, very clear for our children and youth and families, with much protection and so much love and nurturing, guided by our ancestors and our elders, grounded in our culture and our values and principles, to ensure that our children are going to be well and our families. Again, I just wanted to thank you all for being here to do this work today and every day. Kleko.
Klako, Deb, Haichka, Siam, and all my relations, thank you so much for your beautiful words. And we will turn it over to Mary T.G. and Joni.
Good morning, everybody. I'm coming to you from cold Lheidli T'enneh territory. I think this is really now winter set in. It's not a good day. Any day is a good day, but today it's pretty cold. So I'm really excited to be here with you and able to provide the opportunity just to talk about some of the work that we have been doing over the last, over 30 years, and the importance of an approach. I think when we think about how we're approaching services, oftentimes you think, oh, we're just providing services, but we never really think about how do we put it into a collective and actually develop an approach. It's important to actually have an approach because then it's easier to actually start developing indicators and outcomes. So that's what we're going to be speaking about today. But my name is Mary T.G. Gray. I am Gikson and Carrier. I come from the Takla Nation. I am Lachkibu clan, Wolf clan, and my hereditary chief's name is Maushim Gabu. I'm also the executive director of Carrier County Family Services for Child and Family, and I'm the chair of the wonderful Our Children Our Way Society. I also represent British Columbia on the National Advisory Committee for Child and Family Service Long-Term Reform. And also I'm on the Caring Society as BC's representative, and I am the president of the BC Aboriginal Child Care Society. So I mentioned that because it's really important to note that all of these different places I've come from, you know, with the BC Aboriginal Child Care Society, you know, having the opportunity to represent BC on the national level really has lent that broader view of how we provide services, so that we're not just looking at child and family services in a silo, rather we're looking at it in a holistic life cycle approach. Before I get started though, if I could have Joni, my co-presenter, introduce herself.
In Hanzu, everybody. Sai Joni Conlon Satne. My name is Joni Conlon, and I'm the Director of Child Safety. We're a developmental department as we're moving towards furthering our jurisdictional reach within the 11 member nations of Sekani Family Services. And so we're developing a more fulsome child safety response here at Sekani. So I've been tasked with that, the honor and privilege of being tasked with that. And I come from the Seke Dene Nation. I'm Sekani and Cree. On my father's side, my mother is Sekani. And it's just an honor to be here calling in from the traditional and unceded territories of the Wet'suwet'en people here in Burns Lake proper. And I just want to thank Deb for opening us up in such a good way, grounding us. Because we know lots of families are hurting right now, and there's been a lot of loss in our communities. So thank you. Masai.
Next slide.
Oh. Is Michelle or Kai there?
Yeah, the next slide.
I'm not the keeper of the slide. I'm not sure who has the screen.
Who is
I
the
do.
clicker?
Can you see that? We've got the life cycle.
Yeah, I didn't see the next slide.
Okay. There you go.
Thanks, Michelle.
I'll just start talking about the history of Sekani. So we were developing and became incorporated in 1990 as Sekani Tribal Council. We were a branch society. Earlier, what we were named was the Northern Native Family Services. And what happened is that the Sekani Tribal Council were in the midst of negotiating comprehensive treaty. That's how the Tribal Council, as all tribal councils in British Columbia came to be, was to do this negotiations around decision making for our lands and our resources. I say that because you'll see how that time when we were created as a health and service social service society was really influenced by the politic of the day. And so what had happened is, while there were the leaders and whatnot negotiating this treaty, what was happening in some of our in all our communities, there was a high rate of children going into care. And so this came to the chief's table, and the chief said, well, we got to do something about this. At the same time, we were negotiating the health agreements, you know, when the health prior to the health authority being established, we had all the nations had their own health agreement. And so we were negotiating that, the transfer of health to the Sekani, the Northern Native or the Sekani Tribal Council. Northern Native Family Services was established. And then so what happened at that time was that then our now CEO, Warner Adam, worked alongside the late Perry Shawana, and they went across the country to do some fact finding, because if they were directed by the chiefs and the leadership to do something around child welfare, to take control, they wanted to make sure what they were doing was actually going to meet the needs of the people. And what they came back and found was that there could not be a separate umbrella of social services and health separate. They actually had to be entwined together, and that has made all the difference. The other big difference maker was that the leadership at the time including hereditary chiefs, including our matriarchs, really came to say, okay, this entity that we're going to be creating to provide social services has to reflect what we want as a people, and that's really about self-determination. So when the Sekani was created, the mandate of the agency was to committed to the healing and empowerment of First Nations families by taking direct responsibility for health, social, legal, and housing services. But back then, we made an amendment to it, but back then it was very clear that we were going to be self-determining in social, legal, and health services. And that's what has made the difference in how we've gone about to create where we're at today. So the everything that we've done to date, and again, is by design. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see now this is all the services that we have now: health services, research, we have data and infotech, housing, legal, child and family. And so what we were doing way back then with the leadership is to say, okay, well, we have a strong mandate to become self-determining. But we also have to really reflect who we are as Indigenous people, as carrier people, or as Yankadene. Yankadene is people of the land, and we're holistic. And so one of the things that we found when we came to the when I came to CSFS all those years ago, over 20 years ago, my first responsibility was actually, I did a 6-month contract, and that was to ensure culture was embedded in everything that we had at CSFS, in our policies, in our procedures, in our standards, anything that we were doing. So working with the community health representative was a good example of how we really pulled in everybody, because it was a community health, the CHRs, that really were the pulse of the nation. They knew what was going on in community, so they also knew what their needs were. So what was happening, as everywhere, and I'm sure many of you could attest to this, especially in community, is that the nurses work in a silo, social workers work in a silo, all of the people were working in silos. They weren't really all together coming together. And given that we didn't have the prevention funding, we had no prevention in BC, it was really important that we took best use of our resources that we did have. So what happened is that we looked at generally, how is it that we see health as a Yankadene? And so one of the things, if you look at this, the philosophy really is simple. You have a healthy baby, you have a healthy child, you'll have a healthy adult, healthy parent, healthy elder, et cetera, And so this life cycle approach, you'll see it starts from conception, the creator conception, prenatal birth, and then early years 7 to 12. Puberty was really important because we put the puberty, but then also there's a point in puberty, which is getting our mind back. So after you've done puberty, you know how crazy you are, you're all moody, but then there's a phase where when you're getting out of puberty where you're actually making sense, and that's what we call getting our mind back. The young adult, knowledge holders 31 to 59, elders 60 plus, end of life, and creator. These all came, these ages, there was a lot of debate back and forth with nursing, social worker, with everything. We looked at different places where it made sense to have these age brackets, age differences. And it makes a big difference when you identify the ages that we're going to be talking about. Next slide, please. So the life cycle approach, as I said, employs a holistic framework, and it looks at the safety, emotional, cultural, psychological safety, all of these pieces, safety within that context. Also, it understands the interconnectedness of the child's safety requires a full range of services to wrap around. So again, you have to remember at the time, we did not have prevention. I can't say that enough. So there were certain things that we looked at when we were developing our life cycle approach. The piece was really, you hear this often, well, there's confidentiality. The nurses have their files, everybody has their files. And for us at CSFS, those motherhood documents or those big policies and procedures, all of those different, it's really heavy on confidentiality across the agency. So if you sign our oath of confidentiality for CSFS, it's an expectation that nurses, social workers, everybody is going to be confidential. So there was really no barrier to say, okay, we're going to talk about this individual or this family, and to say that we could not share information. It was still very territorial. And so definitely the life cycle approach is an ongoing educational piece to say, okay, well, we're looking first and foremost, it's not about fulfilling all of these rules, regulations, policies. It's about our children, making sure our children, our families are safe. So when the life cycle approach happened, is that we brought in all the managers from all the disciplines. And that was we then ended up working with BCX. In fact, that's how I really got involved with BCX, because we had a couple of wonderful educators, facilitators that really understood the holistic and the life cycle approach to well-being. And so they facilitated those early conversations and finding out what was impeding us to work together to ensure the wraparound services. It sounds very easy right now. It wasn't always easy, and I'm sure you can attest to that, many of you. So once we had all the managers in, we talked about it and we started the work. And what we soon found out was that it was following the life cycle. So what we did is we identified those gaps in those ages. And so I'll give you an example. One of the gaps that we had back then, of course, is very limited funding, stop, start, go funding, you know how it was, through proposals. And so for like we also knew that there was, of course, now we call it, the birth alerts. So we really concentrated on that prenatal, early, like those early years, but the prenatal was predominant. And we were able to develop a proposal which got approved by the federal government, by the feds, FNIB at the time, for maternal child health. But what we did is that it wasn't enough to provide service to all 11 communities. So we had the maternal child health fund, and then from child and family, we combined that with what we called the family care worker program at the time. We combined those two programs to meet that need of that earlier, the prenatal years. And that became our family preservation worker program. The family care worker was provincially funded, maternal child health federally funded. We put it together and developed that service. So when you look around the life cycle approach, what we would do is come together as managers, as directors, and say, these are the gaps. The gap, for example, the early years, as we're calling it, from 7 to 12, there was not a lot of services. So we're still working on getting those services for that age group. I'm going to leave it to Joan to kind of speak to this slide here.
Yeah, and really at the end of the day, as we look at these slides, we see that the safety, when we talk about Indigenous, the best interests of the Indigenous child and the safety of an Indigenous child, that means a collective holistic approach. That means the emotional safety of a child. It means their cultural safety. It means their psychological safety. So our approach when we're discussing from our perspective as we're developing our child safety response is really, really reliant on those prevention services, because at the end of the day, many of the worries for a child, the safety of a child, is deeply embedded in those preventative services. So if we can circle back and bolster the environment of care in the family, then we can be least intrusive, less disruptive for that child, and really hold that child at the center of community in their homelands with their clan community and where they should be. That's true child well-being. And then when you see, Mary had mentioned earlier that when you uphold child well-being, you're really upholding the family well-being and then community well-being. It's really important to note that child safety is inextricably linked to the well-being of the community. That's why we've been tasked with transforming child welfare in this country. So we've been asked to transform it. And how are we going to do it? The life cycle model really emphasizes those preventative services from the moment of conception. So that's how we're going to undo a lot of trauma, a lot of harm that's come to our communities because of the child welfare system. And so Mary had mentioned earlier that Sekani was not poised to be able to do good work in the area of child safety. But now that we have the dollars and the resources, that's why we're venturing out to expand services. Mary?
Yep. Thank you. I think like one of the good examples I'll use around that time when we, like, this is 20 odd years, like about 20 years ago, and when we didn't have the funding, there was a real good example where, the rubber hits the road and we actually had to test our life cycle approach. We had a young man, and he was in school, he was actually in med school. And him and his partner had a beautiful little girl. And as many of our tragic stories, the mother really, due to all her trauma, really ended up not doing well after the baby was born. As much supports as we can provide, and of course he was at university, and so he left university and went back to his home community to take care of this, to take care of the baby, because now here he was a single father. And of course, the baby had some acute health concerns at the time, and it's a brand new baby, like maybe a month or 2 months old, if that. And what we were able to do, and again, don't forget, we didn't have prevention money on reserve, very limited. But the nurses came together. We were able to have the social workers come together, the family preservation workers together. Like a lot of the extended family weren't doing well either. So through that, that first year of life, like we really wrapped our supports around that young single father. We got respite for him. We provided parenting program. He was in a lot of cases, it was like our little guinea pig, because we would try these things, and then we had the initial case managers. I know, like when you're in the child and family service agent, that's all you provide. You have that, but we had the luxury of having the doctor involved in his care planning, the nurse, and everybody directly right there. We were able to bring in a specialist to look really at with the doctor's help to find the needs of this child, this little baby, because there were acute needs at the early years, because of course, unbeknownst to us, the mother had been using, so this little baby was born with some, the tendencies as newborn newbies, especially really premature baby, with the effects of the mother using drugs and alcohol while in utero. So I think that was really a good example for us. And having at that time, our family preservation workers come in to be able to, even in the evenings, to help, because baby wouldn't stop crying, like doing all these things. So that was a really good test. And I think it really reflected the values and the beliefs that we have as Indigenous people. We know that when we talk about, the child is at the center. And back in the day, and our elders will talk about this, before we had child welfare, what did we do? Like we all came together to take care of that child. So really our values and beliefs are the integral pieces. However you have your values and beliefs in your community has to be reflected in all the standards, the practices, the policies, the procedures. Everything that you're developing has to come from that place of culture. One of the things that I firmly believe, and this is what I often say, is that every child has a right to the warm embrace of culture, clan, and community. And once we start from there, then everybody, all the service professionals has to wrap around that ideology. It's also, how do we define and how do we see a baby? How do we see a child? How do we see family? How do we see clan and their involvement? It sounds very trite. It sounds like, something that we know, but it's something that we must make sure that our service providers are understanding, that it isn't just something that you write down. You actually have to live it. And how do we do that? And you'll see how we do that with that CSFS. Next slide, please. So the frameworks and adapting the frameworks and pathways. So it's as I said, once you've identified your approach to how you're going to provide services, what your beliefs, what your values are, then you must ensure that all your frameworks and your pathways doing that has to reflect that. One of the things that, for example, what we've done at CSFS is that we have the Naukana training. And we say that came from, the genesis of that came from what I was finding is that some of our members that were coming back to a community that unfortunately were adopted out in the 60s, or many of the children that were in care for years and years had never gone back to community, it was more for them that we started doing the research in each community and finding out what the cultural norms of the day were, but also what their history was. And the intent, and we're still working on this, is to develop a book for each community, and it's the Proud to Be book, so that anybody coming into that community understands the philosophy, the beliefs, the culture of that community. So a social worker comes in, a nurse comes in, a new doctor comes in, that they would have an easy thing to do that. That's how the Naukana cultural competency training came about, was that initial research. The reason that research and everything was really important because I take it for granted that I was raised the way I was raised. Like my parents, neither of them went to residential school. So I kind of just take it that, everybody kind of knows what my culture is, or when they're in community. But I stopped myself because I thought many of my, the ones that were older than me never had the luxury of being raised in community because they were at residential school. And so many of our elders, not to forget this, they also need to be taught what the cultural ways are, because that was one of the things intentionally that residential school tried to do. So what we have to do is, when we look at the service provision, we look at adapting the frameworks and the pathways, all of these pieces, that we may make sure that we have the voices of those ones that know the culture, but also the voices of the ones that may not have had the luxury of being raised in the warm embrace of culture, clan, and community. Because it's good to hear from them, because they're like, oh, I didn't know this. I would like to know this. Like, so for example, starting welcoming baby ceremonies, that was something that we did intentionally, because what we heard from the elders and the youth through this time of research, finding out what communities wanted, was that we had a lot of potlatches, or a lot of feasts for funerals, but we did not have a lot of potlatches at the time for celebration. So what we did is we looked at that. And so I worked with the CHRs. I worked with the healers, which were our elders, and we came together and developed the welcoming baby ceremonies all those years ago, because that was a gap. But again, what learning from that was that we had to make sure that what we were practicing and what we were doing had that cultural foundation. And so if there wasn't those cultural teachings about that, but we knew there used to be, because of the residential school, we had to make sure that we researched and we looked and we filled those gaps. And so we revitalized the welcoming babies, for example. And now, all those years, 20 years, like, many of our nations forgot that it was CSFS that helped them revive this welcoming baby ceremonies. And so there's a way that you look at life cycle, there's a way that you look at culture, and the way that you actually start delivering service. And you have to have that of Carrier Sekani practice and policy framework, which we are now in development of, to just add another step to our life cycle approach. Because this gathering the circles, how do we develop that? So gathering the circle, we had elders, parents, community members, youth coming together to find out what the challenges were in community. And we're going to do another round of this again. So what we did then is have the youth and the elders come together. Way back then, it wasn't heard of at the time. They usually had a youth program, elders program. What I did is I asked the youth and then the elders to say what were the challenges in their respective communities. And they came to said, these are all the challenges, these are all the problems. Elders are saying the youth don't respect them, all of these different issues. Youth are saying elders don't understand them, all of these issues that were going on. And then I brought them together in each community, and some elders, some youth, and they came up with the solutions. Those are some of our foundational documents. So what do the youth need to feel safe? What did they need to feel nurtured? What did they need to feel loved? These really basic questions. And so going on and developing those programs based on that, understanding that that life cycle is imperative to the well-being of our people. So the good practice, if you see here on the Sekani practice and policy framework, I often talk about this. Good practices make good policies, which makes good standards, which makes good laws. And so this really, again, is, so if you have a good practice, you're going to have a good standard and you're going to have a good policies, which then you put into your laws that you are making now. I use this again as just a simple example, the caseload. We know that if you, good practice is that the social worker is there to respond to our children in care, to be able to really provide that guidance and that nurturing. Well, you can't do that if you have a caseload of 40 or 50. So our standard is that it's, it's 1 to 8. And our policies will reflect that, but also in some cases where you have like high needs children, like it could be 1 to 4, like what is the needs of those individuals? And that would be embedded in our laws via regulations or via the legal policies. So you'll see how important it is to actually have a good practice and policy framework. So when you're going to develop your laws in the future state, that you actually are grounded and you're working that way now, not later. You start working that way now. So if we're able to have those good laws, good policies, and then you'll have those better outcomes for Indigenous children and families, and you have to be able to measure that. That's why I said at the very beginning that an approach to how you're providing service, that you can have a practice and policy framework. We're having a Sekani practice policy framework. This practice and policy framework will then lend itself to a more comprehensive Sekani service delivery plan, which would then influence your coordination agreement. Joni, is there anything that you wanted to add to this?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on as at the end of this, so that you could see the wisdom in developing this framework, so that when we move towards further exercising authority, we're doing it and transforming the system as we do it. So this model will be taken into the child safety, developing the child safety model. So we talk about our medicine bundle as we're supporting families, because we're focused on bolstering the environment, care, and healing. And so we're gathering the circle. Who does need to be in that circle? Listening, addressing, and finding solution. And Mary always says this in terms of addressing and finding solutions. Is this good enough for your child? She'll often ask us to reflect on that. So we're already building that practice, so that when we need to have address a serious worry, we're ensuring that the community is coming along with and helping and developing those solutions with in tandem, and then really focused on that well-being and belonging. That any solution has to be rooted in, will this bolster that little one or that youth's sense of well-being and belonging? And then not just leaving once the worry is addressed, walking along with families so that we continue that circle strong, so that we continue to walk with families, and so that we're involved in the healing and well-being of that family. Oh, Mary, Ashley has her hand up.
Okay, Ashley.
Hi.
Hi.
I just put my question in the chat, but I noticed a lot of bands in my area don't have policies in place because the prevention funding is so new to them, including my own. So what do you suggest when these bands don't have policies for the prevention funding?
Do you have an agency close by?
We do.
What is it? Which agency? Where are you situated?
Kids and Child and Family Services.
I'm going to say this, and I was at the All Chiefs meeting last week, and many of the leadership came up to me, like, and oftentimes this happens, or else I get phone calls. It is disconcerting to me because what happens, and again, like I always say this, jurisdiction and offloading, there's a fine line. And because this is a child and family costs a lot of money, what we're finding is that both the federal and the provincial government are offloading those programs that cost money, or those initiatives that cost money. They're holding on to the decision-making powers where those programs or initiatives make money. For example, forestry, mining, all of that. Like let's keep jurisdiction for the province in Canada. But the ones that are costing money, education, child and family, and all of those are being offloaded. So when you look at the prevention funding that you're getting, both provincially and if you're getting any from provincial government, which I know you're not, it's important to note like be very clear about what decisions you're going to be making, especially if you're not part of an agency. Cost that out, and then find out like from the agencies, but our Children Our Way Secretariat, that's the body here. The intent of our secretariat is to help not only agencies, but those nations that are doing this work, especially around prevention, with the work around policies and procedures. So Ashley, we do have, I think like we have many of our agencies do have already existing policies. And I think that's what we're trying to do at our Children Our Way, is to gather those policies so that we could share that. One of the recommendations, actually, it was a good recommendation that I received, and I haven't even got back. It was at the our Children Our Way conference. If you weren't able to attend that, definitely wherever it's recorded, I think you should watch some of that. But one of the things that we did get asked, I got asked, was actually, could there be a policy and procedure type of a training session, a 1 or 2 day training session, or something just around policy development. So in the absence of that, there are existing, like we do have the AOPSI policies and standards, and many of our agencies do have existing policies and procedures when it comes to providing prevention. I think it's important to really start like looking at the pathways that other agencies have provided as to how do you develop a policy, for example, but what is a practice on the ground? And that's what's really important, is what are you doing right now in your community to prevent children going into care? How is it that you're defining holistic health? How is it that you're defining culturally appropriate services? Like just those basic definitions, you'll find aren't so basic. Like that will be the foundation of how you proceed. So I think there is that opportunity at our Children Our Way to kind of gather that up and to help those nations. So keep in contact with our Children Our Way. Look at their site. There's already like a lot of good resources. And then again, I think that, just because I've been asked, I do think that we should have a practice and policy development session at some point here, seminars, whether or not we do it via Zoom or in person. Okay, does that answer your question, Ashley? Yeah. Okay,
Yes, thank
so
you.
yeah, you're welcome. A little bit long-winded, but I sort of had to, part of my workshop here. So our next slide. So this one is this is the Creating Wellness Together. And I'm going to have Joni speak to it.
Thanks, Mary. So we provide services to 11 member nations. As you see, they're identified there. It's over a huge range of territory. It's over 76,000 square kilometers that we provide service to. We have offices that are very close to every one of these communities, and that's so that we can provide optimal family services. So we're doing those prevention, front-loading prevention services, that holistic support. I think it's important to note that while we're looking at the life cycle model that we have, that community engagement is really, really pivotal and at the heart of this, doing good community engagement. Mary has always said, and Warner, as they developed for over 30 years of providing service to community members, is that it's really important that as you're developing those services for those that it's going to impact the most, that we consult with those community members. So we're able to identify the services that are really fitting for those members, and in order to create that holistic approach for those community members. The other thing that we have done over the years is really develop the basis for good community wellness teams, those champions out in community that are supporting the holistic health and well-being of their community members. So the community wellness team are pivotal to this process. And so they're really focused on improving the outcomes for not only children, but families in the communities that they live in. The elders, the matriarchs as well, who are pivotal to those community wellness teams, are included in helping develop or look at those gaps that Mary had referred to. Like if there's issues, and I'll give you an example, like if a community is really impacted by suicide, then we're able to jump in, provide, front load those services to really address that issue. Of course, we're seeing more and more impacts from the opioid crisis. So how does the community wellness team want to address that? And so they're very helpful in being able to develop those services. They are truly the experts on the ground. And then if you look at when we look at the cultural continuity, it's inextricably linked to child safety and their overall well-being. It helps us develop our child and youth teams, and also develop parenting and support services, and is critically important to developing those prevention services. Mary, did you want to add anything?
No, I think that's a good overview. One of the things I just wanted to touch base on, we have the community wellness teams, and they used to be called the community-based teams. If you recall from all those years ago, we got a little bit of funding from the province. And so those teams are the ones that really know what's happening in community. So we utilize those teams to let us know what are the priority areas, what's the emergent and urgent issues in community, and then we're able to respond to that. One of the things that we do have at Sekani is that we have 17 doctors that actually work for us. 14 doctors that actually work for us, and then access to 17 specialists. So we're able to provide really that holistic wraparound support. So when you're developing your, if you are developing your new programming around prevention, to never forget about that health aspect. I find that across the country that where there's only certain places like the child and family service, but the health component, the doctors, the nurses, the nurse practitioners, the occupant, all of these different people have to be included in whether or not you do it through protocols with your health provider, your health unit or your health department, and within your own nation, it has to be very strong. So when we have the community wellness team, again, what do I always say? Jurisdiction is your ability to make decisions. You have the community wellness team that's able to say, okay, this is what we need. This is what we need. And then so we have the wraparound supports in community. And so that's where you have that the cultural continuity, because it's the ones in the community that knows what's best for their community, and also that cultural aspect. And then you're able to provide the services. I will also say, important. Always make sure that you actually have a research or a policy research department when you first start up. I don't care if you have to rob Peter, pay Paul, or do something, because that's where you get the funding to actually provide support. So when we didn't have any prevention money, we partnered with the university, for example, to develop our youth suicide program. That we got $3 million over 5 years. Through that money, we were able to then have culture camps. That's how we started the culture camps all those years ago, was through a partnership with universities. So there's an important part here when we're going forward to ensure that you are partnered with universities or something, or look at like CIHR, like all of these different places where they have grants available, even the federal government, like through they had the National Crime Prevention provincially and federally, where you could get not only the funding to deliver the programs or to try innovative ways, but important to research the accountability and the outcome measures. That's what's really important, I think is very important. So the next piece we have, the next slide, is early childhood development. And again, so this is this is a part of our early years. And again, to respond to the community, one of the things that we didn't have, well, everywhere, we know this. In the North, for non-Indigenous, for everybody in the North, it's hard to get programs. I know it's the same for North Islands, for in the Kootenays, all these remote places in our province, it's very hard to get occupational therapists, speech language pathologists, child psychiatrists, child psychologists. It's always difficult to get that. So what we did way back in the day, following our life cycle approach, we understood there were gaps in services in those early years. And so we developed a proposal for the Best Beginnings Outreach Program, what we call the Best Beginnings Outreach Program. And it's a BBOP program, and it's still running and it's very successful. So we actually have a virtual option, but we also have a mobile, we used to have a mobile van that would go out to communities and provide that, those early year services, occupational therapists and all of that, because it wasn't going into our remote communities. And that program has sort of developed over the years. So now we've just hired a couple of occupational therapists for that program. We have speech pathologists, but really adapting to new technology as well. So we do have that program utilizing, in some cases, virtual options for speech pathology even. So we have to, part of this life cycle approach, the beauty of it is identifying those emergent and urgent issues in real time and being able to bring in everybody to respond to this. One of the other things that this approach really identifies is if we don't have the expertise to do the work, let's build resident capacity. So for early childhood development, all those years ago, we started, we partnered as a pilot a long time ago. I don't remember how many years ago, a pilot. We worked closely with NVIT, and so we were able to develop the first early childhood development program as a cohort so that we could develop our own early childhood educators, which is still, we're doing another cohort. We've been doing this for off and on for years. And what we found is that early childhood is a very good program, of course, as you know, to ladder into a higher degree, whether or not it be a degree in social work. So we have this early childhood development, which is foundational to us. We also identified, for example, the middle years really not receiving as much service. There was a lot of, well, not a lot, but as much more service for the early years, like the baby years and whatnot. But around that 7 to 12, a real big gap in services. And so we've been really intentional to identify that. So now we have like a middle years Walk Tall program, which is our youth program. We have the middle years, the equine therapy program. We have many more middle years programs because that was coming from not only the parents, but the youth themselves saying, why don't I get to go to that group? Why don't I get? So they've seen their older brothers and sisters go to that, but they weren't able to. And so we were able to have like a conference for that from 8 to 12, which I think we're going to do this year again. So yeah, we just definitely have a wonderful early childhood development program, and that's really that was really because Dawn Pearson, who is our director of early childhood, really understands the community, is in the community. She worked her way up. She's been with us for almost 18 years, I think 17 years. She's been with us for a long time. And so I really love this early childhood development because we have maternal child health now in all our communities. We never used to have that. Now with the prevention funding, we have maternal child health. We have the middle years program. We have, the baby years. And then we also have we developed our own parenting program all those years ago. We didn't have a lot of funding to do it, but we did, again, we combined that with research. So we were able to go out to each of our nations and talk about what did child rearing look like a long time ago? What did child discipline, if you will, look like a long time ago traditionally? And we were able to incorporate that into our Carrier Sekani specific Brigand Tradition Home Family parenting programming. Next slide. We also have youth services, and that's by Kayla Brownscombe. And again, this is a beautiful program. We have offices, our youth centers in our Prince George, Proper, Vanderhoof, Burns Lake. We do have the foundry in Burns Lake, and then we are going to be developing another foundry in Vanderhoof. And again, coming from the community, that youth services has always been important to the communities. We didn't have a lot of money, as you know, for those youth services. I know all of you, you know, I'm talking to people that know this, that it's always been a difficult place. You know, our people say this, and I can say this honestly, our people say, oh, our youth is our future, but yet there'd be no concentration or no deliberate initiative generally for youth services. So when we had no more money for youth services, it was all we did was through proposals. I would ask, you know, our nations, you know, to please help us out, and they, again, they didn't have any money too. So our youth services literally went sometimes week to week. And now that we have the prevention, the post-majority, we are, you know, really developing those youth service program, again, based on the need. One of the things that we do have in Carrier Sekani is the Skyza, the youth center there, and that's the Children of Chiefs House, and that is one of the most beautiful but really difficult centers, and it's in the urban setting in Prince George, and so it's where it's low barrier, and so high risk children go there, or youth go there, low barrier, so they come in, you know, whether or not they're, you know, using or on the like living on homeless on the streets or whatever's going on, the situation, that we accept them all to come in. And we, you know, we're just hoping that we're, you know, we're providing that safe space just even for a while, so that when they're ready to move on to the next place of healing, that we're there for them, and just to show them love and compassion. So that to me is again, coming from a need from the community. One thing that we also do within this is that Carrier Sekani, but as soon as we received the prevention funding in 2018 or so, 2017, 2018, we actually provided some money directly to the nations after engaging extensively with each of our nations to find out, what are your needs? What does prevention look like to you? What does culturally preventative programs look like to you? Once we got all of that, we developed community service delivery plan for each of our nations. In each of those community service delivery plans, they do have youth workers. So we combine our youth workers at CSFS with the nation youth workers to work together. And so we offer the same training, we offer the same supports. And so we're really working, our goals this next coming few years is to really strengthen the nation-based youth programming, because it's definitely a priority that we see. Next. Again, this is mental health, and this is Marilyn Jansen. So we've developed our own mental health and wellness program. We really based it on the culture stuff. When I say, you know, because of the capacity within our nations, within the organization, one of the things that we found was a stumbling block to receiving some funding to do the research that we needed, and thereby getting those best practices research and whatnot, is that we didn't have a doctor on staff to actually be the principal investigator. So what we did is Travis Hollick, who was leading up the research and some of the health programming, went back to school to become Dr. Travis Hollick. We did the same for mental wellness. Christina Dobson, who was one of our mental health and wellness providers, she actually went back to school and is now Dr. Christina Dobson. Her doctorate was on looking at Carrier Sekani specific cultural mental health and wellness programming. What does that look like? How do you develop it? How do you run it? So again, this is a really excellent service. We can't, as everywhere else, we can't get enough mental health services, especially specializing in the early years and youth services. Okay, next slide. Joni.
When we were developing this presentation, we were really thoughtful about where to put the child safety and well-being. And I said at the OCAL presentation that really we have to put child safety at the end, because if we've front loaded all of the prevention services, if we've ensured that families feel supported and children and youth know exactly who they are, and you build strong children and youth, strong families, support the community well-being, then we can front load so that we don't have to have a intrusive child safety response. So we're very thoughtful in where we place this slide. And I always said the director of child safety should speak last and the least amount, because really at the end of the day, if we've done the heavy work, that heavy work of prevention services, you'll be have to have a very minimal response. I think it's important to know that that the life cycle model was really, really important to bolster the environment of care, like I said. And when all members of the family receive that support, wherever they fall on the life cycle model, that really we're addressing the systemic barriers for those individuals. I think that I think we've noted that, like, one of the things I was just going to refer back to the youth services, and the youth services, they have a youth advisory council, and these youth were the ones who were really impacted by being in care. And the question was posed to them at the youth advisory: what would have helped? What would have helped your family, your environment of care, and your experience of being in care? And one of the youth said, I just wanted to know who I was and where I belonged. And that was going to be really important. It was really important to them. Then other youth chimed in to talk about how they didn't want to feel like they were a stranger in their own community. And that was part of the trauma. Lots of times we, as social workers, forget that the system is traumatic. Being in care is traumatic. And so we don't want to be contributing to that. So I think that's really why we're in a really good place to start developing a child well-being response, because we've had Mary and her team really work hard on the practice and really the principles that uphold a good child safety team. So we're really excited to do this work. We're really excited to do the heavy work of transforming a system. And I think that comes from the wisdom of our ancestors and the wisdom of our leadership, like Mary and her team. So we're super thankful, and we're really looking at the gaps in service, what really is contributing to why children are coming into care. And we're trying to go upstream, as Cindy Blackstock always talks about. Let's go upstream so that we can start building those services to really address what families need in order to keep their children safe and cared for. And so I think that's the piece to the child and safety and well-being. We're still not online yet. We're in a developmental phase, but we're excited in this next following year.
And I think it's really important to note that it was intentional that we did not take on the protection piece, and for lack of a better term, is because we needed to make sure that we were doing it in the right way. And all of these years of experience with our family preservation workers on the ground, working with alongside and sometimes against MCFD, all of those experiences has led us to develop our own child safety model. One of the things that I've often said is that we didn't have enough money back then to do it right. We weren't going to receive any new monies to do it right. We also had to make sure that we developed trust with the community. And so I always say this: we want to have the most vulnerable person in our nations be able to come forward to anybody at CSFS or even at the band to say, hey, I need help, without fear of reprisal, without fear of losing their children or their babies. And I use this as a personal example where a young girl was having a really bad postpartum. Her baby wasn't thriving, and it was her friend, who was her cousin, her friend, that came forward and said, Mary, like, she's having difficulty and she's really scared. I was able to call her and say, listen, like I'm going to be sending a worker over. I will be like, if I could be in community right now, I'd go come out myself, but I'm sending a worker over. Trust that person. We're not there to take your kid. We're just there to help you. So we were able to get her help while after her baby was born, or even before the baby was born. Her boyfriend was in and out of her life, and they just sort of took off. So she was here like a single mother, very scared, didn't have a healthy family to lean on. So her healthy person ended up being our staff, the family preservation worker staff. And after when I finally got a chance to have a chat with her, we sort of dealt with everything that needed to be dealt with. And I asked her, well, you know, she never wanted to come to the office. She never wanted to go to tell the nurse what was going on. And she said, well, because she was a youth all those years ago and heard me speak and saw me in community. I was developing the youth programming way a long time ago. And she goes, well, and then I trusted you. She said, I trusted you because you understood. And it always stayed with me that one of the most important things that we do right now, each and every day, is that we make sure that when we're providing all these prevention programs, when we're providing the service and identifying the priorities, is that we're developing trust with our community so that they come to us way before any intervention needs to occur. I think that's one of the most important things we do. And how do we develop trust? We're going to be developing this year a trust strategy, if you will. Many companies have this. They don't call it trust. They call it customer satisfaction. They call it whatever else strategies. But I'm developing a trust strategy because it's something that you already kind of do as social workers. You kind of already do it in community, but you actually need to kind of formalize it so people who come into your agency or who's providing the service know what they need to be doing, that it's intentional. It's an intentional, Joni always says that it's always about relationships. We get that, we know that, but sometimes our service providers don't get that. It's like, okay, let's just provide the service and get out, especially when you're looking at the time and how much workload people have, that importance of building relationships. And part of the trust piece is, being consistent, being respectful, just developing that mutually respectful relationship, being responsive and being accountable and following up. There's a few things that you have to do to develop that trust in community. And the way you develop trust in community is it's individual trust. That's what you have to do. And then so when you're going on to have the full child safety department, that they know they could come to us without fear of losing their babies to care. That's what we want to do. And I think that's really important. Next slide.
Mary, I just wanted to mention another thing, that in terms of, as we were getting ready for this day, Mary had always said, tell me what you're doing right now in your practice that is going to contribute to good policy. So write it down, keep a log of it. Just tell me the creative strategies that you're using to keep families together. And we kind of, okay, we're doing this. But the why certainly fell into place when we started to move towards what our next slide talks about is how did we start developing the law? And so now we're using all of those good, wise approaches to help build good law. And I think that's important too, as we even move under, this delegated model, we still can practice in that way so that it's as seamless as possible when we move on to our Sekani law. So Mary had always said, you should be able to move out of the CFCSA into our law in a really seamless fashion because of that good practice.
Mm-hmm. I really like the analogy, Joni, that you say like a calm water lapping the shore, and that's what we want. So when we have the life cycle approach and we've got the policies and procedures based on that, then you're going to have all of the front-loaded services and the capacity that is required. Capacity is important, and the resources required. So when you go into get the development of your own law, there will be no children that fall through the cracks. We sure saw that when you look at the Don't Look Away report with the horrific death of that little young boy, Colby. We don't want that to happen. And so how we do that. So the jurisdiction piece is important. And that's why I said at the very beginning, have an approach to how you're providing services that reflects who you are as our First Nations people, your values, your beliefs, your practices, not only in the past, but what are the cultural norms and practices today that's working for your people, that's working for your children and families. Those are what you bring forward to when you're developing your own laws. Next one. Okay, and this is the data governance piece. I think this is really important because what do I always say about jurisdiction? It's your ability to make good decisions. How do you make good decisions? Is that you have the information. One of the things that I like to call this, I call it the sacred trust, because people's information is valuable. And so that is like money, like, you know what you call it? You have a trust that's there forever, this trust for of funding. And that's why I call it the trust, because it is the trust in getting the information, but it's also a trust where you're holding all the data. And the sacred trust is because that information is sacred. So we ensure that the clients here have the right to confidentiality, by securing storage. This is really important to make sure that people understand who has access to their personal information, how this information is being used, when their personal information is sharing, and to right to raise concerns regarding the privacy of handling their personal information. This is important because when we're collecting data, be it in research or even actually providing the services, that our people are really aware of where their information is going. And so it's again developing that sacred trust. This is important too because this information lends itself for us when we're looking at what are the gaps of the life cycle, that we understand what's coming right from our clients, right from our members, to say this is sort of an ongoing theme, so we need to address this in the best possible way. We also use information though when we're developing our own standards, which is the next slide. I think it's the next slide, yeah. We need to ensure that these standards of service and measure, like we're going to be using this information, or we already do, for our in our jurisdictional framework. You will see where there's a Juanini Council comprised of hereditary chiefs, of leaders in the community, you know, members of the member nation, the family or parent and youth. When they make decisions about funding, for example, you need the best information to say, okay, well, you know what, this community X is, there's an increase in child and family service concerns, there's an increase in teenage pregnancies, there's an increase in opioid deaths, whatever it is. That is going to identify where those priority needs are. We have the life cycle approach that will then identify what programs need across the life cycle, which then spurs it on for the nurses, the social workers to develop a response to that. It's important because we also need to know the investments that we're making into community, are they actually meeting the criteria? We need performance measures. So we need these standards, and again, good practice makes good standards, good policies, good laws, but we need to measure that so that we can adjust our program service delivery and the funding to meet the needs of our community. Next one. Again, this to bring this up, a healthy baby, healthy parent, healthy community, healthy nation. And I think this is what's really important is our law, our jurisdictional framework, the purpose of our law, which we're almost about 75-80% completed our law. Then the purpose statement is every Carrie Sekani child has a right to live up to their full potential. And what does that mean? And that means that they have a place to live, they have clothing, they have food, they have education, but they also have the basic stuff. They have access to their culture, to their land, that they have, that they have love, that they have a sense of belonging. And so our laws, I always call it our act of love, reflects this. And that's why it's really important when you have the life cycle, what is it that the baby needs to live up to their full potential? They need a healthy mother, a mother that is not, not utilizing drugs or alcohol. We're hoping that's the case, but a healthy baby in utero, a healthy child, all of these things, that's where it starts. And that's why that importance of the life cycle. So every time we put an intervention into each of these life cycles, we know there's a better opportunity for the next, if not this generation, the next generation to have a healthy baby. And that's where the life cycle approach is really important when it comes to not only services today, but when we have our own laws, that we're actually able to make real change and be able to identify the change, the positive change, and to actually be able to record that so that we are providing the best service we can so that each of our babies have the ability to live up to their full potential. Next slide. Yes. Children have always been at the center of the circle of life, the center of the center of the circle of caring among Indigenous peoples across Canada. Children do not belong to parents. Each child is a unique gift from the Creator to be cherished, protected, and nurtured into being respectful of all living things. And so that's our slide. So did we want to show this? Yeah. Okay, we'll leave you with our little video. I'm sure some of you have seen it, but if not, it's always good to see again.
Just give me one moment to pull the video up there, folks. I want to say thank you so much, Mary and Joni. That was super interesting. A ton of great information. Really grateful for your sharing here. And maybe we'll just turn over to one or two questions while I pull the
We could
video
do
up
questions and then show this at the very last. Yeah, let's do it.
Perfect.
Let's
That
do
would be
some
great.
couple of questions
you.
and
Yeah.
show this.
Excellent. So let's just go in order of the questions as they came in. What do we have first here? Antoinette, yes, we will be sharing the slides out. It'll be available on our website after. A few thank yous in the chat. So I think we can go to Maggie.
Awesome. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Hi, Maggie Gamblin, Maggie Myrna Gamblin from Norway House Cree Nation. I'm really glad I joined your meeting here. I just wanted to share, first of all, we are probably about 97% complete with the draft of our law, like our law that we intend to enact in written form under Bill C-92. So I just wanted to share a couple of things, like when we were looking at Bill C-92, in terms of culturally appropriate services, I'm one member of a group of 15 elders that are advising Norway House Cree Nation on the drafting of the law, and I coordinate the actual drafting. So when we looked at culturally appropriate services, and in regards to prevention and protection services, one of the things that we had identified immediately is that language as the primary parenting tool that we all have within our nation. And many of our young families have lost the connection with that language in terms of being able to actually speak it fluently. So we looked at that in terms of embedding that into our law to ensure that that primary parenting tool will be protected, and the ability to provide service to our parents and their children to be able to learn their language, relearn their language, become more fluent in their language. So an example that we came across was that under Manitoba Child and Family Services, they have a program so that when Manitoba CFS social workers apprehend a child that's Indigenous and place them in a foster home, say in the city of Winnipeg, they will fund a service provider that speaks the language of that child to go in and help teach the child their language. So we ran with that idea and thought, okay, well, why do we not consider creating in-home services, not just for children in care, because one of the things about the tribunal decision is that they recognize that we have a lot of catching up to do, right? So as an overall prevention service, where in our I guess our model that's going to, like, I have a hard time with the language, the English conversion, but our model is holistic based on, you know, our practices that have been developed over thousands of years, which of course includes the language, and it stems from the language. So, and the life cycle, not only from, you know, pre-birth to after we leave this earth, that we, and I'll use the word traditional, but it's also historical for us. It's also seasonal. So those are some of the things that we've been looking at. And I just wanted to be able to share that bit of information. And that's all. Thanks.
Thank you so much, and yeah, beautiful territory. I was had the privilege of going to Nelson House and Norway House, and I was doing the film For Love up there. So yeah, I really appreciate your points. And one of the things that so when we looked at developing C92, so I was on the legislative working group. We do have a law pre-law before C92 was developed. But myself, Scott Smith from Arid Barreless, Paul Seaman went across the country and developed our the first federal enabling legislation. Unfortunately, it didn't see the light of day due to political interference, and so then the Fed sort of held the pen at C92. I was on the legislative working group for that as well, but really that cultural piece. And what I often said is that, you know, the transference of our historical knowledge or traditional knowledge, culture is not cost neutral. It's a cost that if we're really talking about reconciliation, when the residential school was created, was to create little white people, and to get rid of the Indian and save the child, kill the savage type thing. So we need to actually, it's the cost. So in your laws, because there isn't a funding component within C92, you have to make sure that you're right. The way that you're doing it is actually embedded in service. One of the things, our law that we're developed, the first thing that we developed before anything else is that we did the rights, instead of a best interest of the child, what we did is the rights of a carrier Sekani child. And in those rights is the right to culture and language, the right to land and to benefit from the resources of the land. Is really a rights perspective. Because of this, that was ripped away. They do have a right to their language. I like the idea that when you're saying that the provider to go in to teach the language to the ones that are in the homes, and it's very difficult for us to get language speakers, fluent speakers. This is an issue across the country. I know when I was up north there in northern Manitoba, many of the northern communities, the strength is that they still have their language beautiful to hear. So one of the things that we've embedded now, it's something that we don't have to do after the laws, that we actually embed it now. We have a cultural and language program. We have it, we're funding that through post-majority. We're funding it through all of that. We have cultural workers in each of our community. We just hired a seasoned social worker with her degree in social worker, master's in social work. And she is and she's from our community. So she's doing the cultural practice, overseeing all the cultural practice to make sure it's embedded. Also, the maternal child health piece, like the training around that is embedded in culture. But what we are doing is the language piece. We're really working on the language piece. Because when you get your own laws, as I said, that those services, as you're saying, ought to be there already before we even enact our laws. So what are we doing right now to build capacity? And 100%, I agree with you. One of the things I also wanted to say, one of the models of the life cycle approach, when we looked at that, of course, it's going to be seasonal. So there are activities, those cultural activities, and our youth programs is built around that. What did you do in the winter, in the spring? What medicines did you pick? Like all of that kind of stuff. And that's really important. So when you say the cultural, it's got to be cultural, you have to reflect those seasonal activities as well. In fact, I think that the seasonal activities actually is a practice framework in itself, which if somebody doesn't have an approach, use a seasonal approach to providing services. Next question.
Thanks,
Mary,
Mary.
I just wanted to add in on that as well, is the Youth Advisory Council. were really instrumental in the youth develop their rights of the carrier Sekani child
Yeah.
and youth. And that was one of the biggest pieces. Kayla Brownscombe, the Director of Youth Services, and Davina Volk, Director of Community Youth Services, really identified that the youth were asking for, if I want to learn language, how do I drive it? How do I drive how I'm going to learn? And also a lot around destigmatizing language learning, because there was a lot of shame around not knowing. And so how do we create a safe environment for these children and youth to learn, but also their parents to learn, because there was so much stigma around that. So the Youth Advisory Council has already identified that. So we're hearing from our youth about how important language is.
Thanks, Joni and Mary. So we have a number of questions in the chat here from Lenore. So maybe we'll take them one at a time, and then we'll move to Michelle's question after. So the first question is, how do you deal with multiple nations when planning for services for the child and their family?
I think it's a lot of patience, and you need to have people like on the ground that knows the community, and then bringing the family together. I'm thinking about when you have, especially when you have one nation wanting this outcome and you have another nation wanting the other outcome. We do have in our programming, as I said, we have legal services. So we developed our own family law model about 18, 19 years ago. That's what what we're doing now, our legal department is built on. So we do have mediation, family justice facilitators, we call them, that can provide this. And so at the end of the day, we utilize the best interest of that carrier Sekani child as a foundation, of course, and then you have everybody come in together. So that's how we deal with the multiple nations, bringing them all in a room and having those meetings. Joni, did you want to add to that question?
Well, I was just going to write in the chat that the community wellness team, when those
Yes.
are up and running and functioning, they definitely contribute to planning for those services. They really are the experts. They know what's happening in community. And also they have a long range focus on what do they want to build in their community long term. I think also those trained mediators are instrumental. And we've heard from our community, we have a very unique governance across the 11 member nations. Some are potlatching people, some maybe are not, or their potlatch looks different. We have various dialects across the territory. So we have to be incredibly respectful of that, the differing approaches. And it really is the community wellness teams that help identify that, make us, support us to walk in a good way. And also our matriarchs are incredibly important in this process as well, as we're planning for services.
Thank you very much. I'm going to put the next two questions kind of together here. So how do you handle situations when a parent does not want nation involvement? Or how do you support children who were never raised in their culture and community and the parents do not want this way of supports?
I think this is a lot of it's not uncommon, not only with us but across the country. So this is why when a parent, and they have a right to not to have the nation be involved in their stuff, and I know why. In some cases, I've heard this, where the parent, the mother may have been harmed by the one that's in leadership or somebody that's on council, so they want nothing to do with them, and so we respect that right. I call it stealth service providing because we don't have anything in our vehicles or anything that says CSFS all the time. Like I know some people have that, but in some cases where the people don't want them to know that that they're getting service, we have to provide that. We have to provide that anonymity. But when they don't want the nation involvement, we don't involve the nation. What I do as director is I say, okay, they'll say, oh, well, there's this issue. And I'll say, we are responding. We've been dealing with this, or we are dealing with this family or whatever, like whatever information that I can release, that's all I do. But so that they're trusting that the nation won't be involved in their decision making. They definitely have that right. And I think that this supporting children who never raised in their cultural community and parents do not want this way of supports. There's only a few times that we've had this, but it's very difficult. And then what we can just do is reach out, provide the resources, let them know when the activities are happening, and really trying to find out, like, so normally in those cases, we're already providing family support and they've been, what we're doing though is we're bringing culture to them, or what I call it's a home to you program. Where we can have like the stuff in the urban setting that's culture, that where it's a safe place that they can go. They don't necessarily need to go right back to their community. It's a softer way for them to understand who they are, because at the end of the day, 100%, every person, it doesn't matter where you're from, need to know where you come from, need to have that to be that have that identity and belong somewhere, because we know research shows that it then is an indicator. If you know who you are, where you come from, you have a better chance at good outcomes. So the importance of that. And once we explain that to parents to say, this is important, it's not only about you, it's about your child as well, in a soft way. It's a lot of conversation back and forth. Joni?
Yeah, Mary has always said, be really cognizant that some of the trauma might have originated in community. And so to walk gently with the family, Mary's really put that at the forefront of our practice. So we're very cognizant about that, but also really appreciating that trauma is not equated to culture, and really we're the bridge back into community in a good, safe way. And so how can we do that in the safest way possible? And that comes through really being able to create initially that really safe space, and then just branching out, walking with family, participating in community events. Mary, I don't know if you were able to talk about the elder youth mentorship. So for example, Mary comes up with these ideas in the middle of the night too, and she emails us and she's like, this is what we're going to do. And so Mary had come up with this brilliant idea of maybe sometimes our youth don't have that auntie or atsu grandma in community anymore. They've passed on or what have you, but that every child should feel like they have that special person in community. So those children in care were paired up with an elder in community, so that when they would return home, they would always have the warm embrace of that knowledge keeper, that elder, that safe person, so that then when they came back to participate in potlatch or an event had happened, that they always have that person. And it's just a safe way to bring them back into community, bring them back into the fold of the clan in a good way.
Beautiful. And this is the last question from Lenore. She says, how do you support children who are children of members but do not qualify for membership at this time?
So this is non-status that we're talking about, probably, or not, or they haven't been registered to a member yet. If they're in our community, if they're in our nation, we support them. There's also, don't forget Jordan's principle, which is if the nation themselves identify that that child that isn't may not be a member, even if it's not Indigenous, if the nation themselves identify them and say this is a child of ours, they're eligible for Jordan's principle. So really important. But for sure, if we can link them somehow, we provide. A child is a child, as my CEO always says. We gotta make sure we provide supports. We'll find a way.
Thanks, Mary. Michelle, you have your hand up. Would you like to go next?
Yes, just a minute. I'm going to see if it's working now. Good morning. Yeah, Michelle Edwards. I work with the Statliam Chiefs Council. I'm the community coordinator, but one of my roles is to be looking after our children. And so I take that seriously because, the land is, I guess, is the provider for our children. And so one of the things that I think most communities across the province, and I'm not too sure, is the band reparation funding that's coming up is it's really about what we lost as culture in our community. And so how as community are we going to be bringing back who we were, the teachings, the language, our wellness. And I'm hoping that's going to be something that we all look into, or that we encourage leadership to make sure that as communities, we're going to find that way how to look after our children, without even having to create agencies. I think, you create them and then all these policies, these barriers, these roadblocks start getting in the way. And one of the things when I talk with the elders, and they've said, I've heard them say it a few times, the best thing for children is to be raised by their grandparents. And then I've also heard people say that, the first child was always raised by the parents. And somewhere along the way, we lost that tradition, we lost that way of life, we lost that teaching. I think it's important that we just start bringing that teaching back so people understand it. I don't know if people were shamed or, you know, if the government just came in and, you know, just started scooping children, even taking them from the grandparents. But we have to start looking back at our communities, you know, because there was a big sense of loss having no children's voices of laughter or even crying in communities when they got taken to residential school. So we need to start having those conversations in all of our communities about what was community life like. How did we all get together? What were the things that we did? What did we share? How did we step in? How did we support? Right? Because that's our way of life. It's all of our way of life. Like we all know that. And I think, you know, there was nation to nation relationships that eventually will get back. You know, it could take time, but I think it's just really important that the teachings are provided to the children. So at least they're hearing them. They may not be able to practice them right away, but at least they hear them. The one thing that the elders say is the best way to protect our knowledge is to teach our children about it, right? Because if we don't, I always say, if we create legacies and our children don't know about them, the legacy is just going to stop. So we have to make sure that they're in our circles all the time, you know, not just when we want to invite them. There should be children, youth, young adults with us all the time so that they know these teachings, right? And, you know, we had Norm Leach, and some of you may know him. He's from the Statlium. And so we just had our first community get, like, you know, what was community like? And I just asked the elders to lead it. I said, we can't wait for leadership to get together and talk about this. We need to go and tell them, this is how we want to promote our culture in our community. So let's help develop the plan. And in his presentation, he talks about our population years ago, before settlement, could have been up to 350 million across Turtle Island. And all these diseases came in and pretty much wiped us out and brought it down to maybe 350,000 when they did the census back in maybe the late 1880s, early 1900s. There was a count of about 350,000 Indigenous people. So that equals 1% survived all of those diseases, all, you know, people coming in and, you know, trying to just wipe us off the face of the earth. So really, we're survivors of that 1%, and we need to carry that in the highest regard and really respect that they were survivors. There was a reason they survived. We need to teach these things so that our kids, when they're growing up, are very proud of who they are. They're not ridiculed for who they are, even our own. If we've got children who understand and are taught their way of life, they can go fishing, hunting, berry picking, that we don't ridicule them. Because when I look at them, it's like, well, at least you can provide for yourself. You're not going to starve. And we all need to look at it that way. Can we all provide for ourselves? And if not, who in the community would? We all wouldn't be those providers. We all had a place. So I really like the philosophy life cycle approach because it comes from the community. And I think that's what we need to start talking about more. What did the community do to help raise our children? And not just leave it to the parents, because I feel like somewhere along the line, we were judging a single parent or a mom or a dad, and, you know, for them not knowing, or an addiction, when we should have stepped in and said, we'll look after your children till you can. Right? So just wanted to say that I really like this, but I hope that we get back to the community approach to look at doing this, and not so much an agency approach. Statlium don't have a delegated agency. Cookstem.
Yeah. Thank you. And when I say this, like, the agency comes from the community. And so when we look at the history of the agencies, what happened, the way that we were created is because there was so much going on. So many of our children were taken away. And so the leadership is who pushed Canada and the province to delegate us to make the decisions. So when we are from the agencies, the ones that respond to us, the 11 of us, are the band council. They identify the ones on the band. We're not separate from the community. We are the agency. In British Columbia, the reason many of the smaller nations weren't part of an agency is because they didn't have the opportunity, because they didn't have the numbers to have it, which was really unfortunate, because you weren't given the same time to build capacity in community. You know, even though we didn't have a lot of money, we were still able to build that capacity into community, to start cultural programs, to start our Walk Tall program, to start our youth programs. And the one thing that you said, which really stays with me, is that, you know, it's a 1% that's left. And so let's talk about the realities in our community. That's one thing. I don't care if you're a nation without an agency or a nation with an agency. Let's talk about the realities and how are we doing this. We understand, we know this. The impact of residential school has left us with, in many cases, there's maybe 1 or 2 language speakers. There's some of our people that aren't aware really of their cultural, or don't practice it because of this total obliteration of our, or try to obliterate our culture and our language. We know that. We also know what we are responding to, and I often say this: why are you trying? What problems do you think your law is going to solve? It's not going to solve anything if you don't have the capacity to deal with sexual abuse, to deal with domestic violence. We have to be very real in our community and address these needs. And so for me, when I look at the, yes, absolutely, it is the community. We're developing that capacity for our communities. And one day down the road, Sekani will morph into something else. It won't be the one to provide service, but while we're doing it at the direction of the nation members to make sure that the children is protected. If we have a mother that doesn't want to come forward to the nation because that person on council was the one that abused them, we protect that mother and we protect that child. We have to be very real, and these policies and procedures that we have is to protect the child. You need those policies, you need those procedures. We're operating in a modern day. We also need to ensure that the nations aren't left there with the liability. What happens if you make a decision without those policies, procedures, and the protection? You make a decision that's going to harm a child, and that liability rests with the nation. So there's a lot of ways that we can do this, making sure that our policies and all of the stuff that we're doing is culturally based as best as we can. And that's why we always say about that life cycle approach, because it is that cultural piece and that important work that needs to be done to face the reality and then respond to the reality, which is hard work. And I commend you, Michelle, and all of you that are on the front lines. It's not a difficult, it is not an easy job by no means, because you hear the heartbreak of our children. You're there, you see it. So how do we respond best that way, in the softest way?
Thank you so much, both. We have another question in the chat from Melinda, who is asking for any tips for our outreach team to encourage parents to be open to accept supports or participate in programs.
Again, it's again and again. Joni says this, my workers say that, it's building relationships. Cheryl Thomas has been in this role for 20 odd years. She teaches me all the time, and she's the one that taught Joni, and it's about the importance of the relationship. Take them for a coffee, listen to them on the phone, do something that is totally just, take them shopping, or do something where you're building that relationship, so then that they're more open to that. And Joni being on the front line, all those years, for many, many years, I think that's it. And sometimes I'll phone, I do, and I say, oh, well, this is Bia, I'm here, I'm just saying, just so that you know, I just actually had a call not very long ago to say, let my worker in. This is the one that's going to help you. They're better than me at this. Go ahead. And so I think it's just a lot of communication and a lot of just reaching out and doing the simplest gestures make a big difference. Joni?
I think that's exactly it. It's showing up in those little times, so that then when there is a worry or something bigger, that you have that trusting relationship so that you can show up. I think showing up is really important. And I just have to say that we work under leadership, Mary and Cheryl Thomas and Sonia, and they show up for their community members, and they're seen, right? And so, we just had a tragedy in our community, and Mary is a hereditary chief. She wears numerous hats out in the community, but she shows up. because she knows she has to show up, and that builds trust. So if you can show up in those little things, you're able to show up when there is a big worry. Because at the end of the day, too, your community members know that you have their back. And even, I think we have to talk about those hard, like Mary had brought up, those hard to talk about issues in community. For example, anything under the CFCSA in British Columbia that's maybe criminal in nature, when there is domestic violence, sexual abuse, or criminal neglect. Do we still want healing for the whole family? And that is our philosophy. We want healing for the community. But how do we do that in a good way, right? Mary?
Yeah, I think, and Joni being there on the front line for like all these years, she's worked in so many different capacities that I call her the mayor of Burns Lake. Everybody calls her like, non-Indigenous, Indigenous. And then I know if I send Joni out, like she's gonna know how to build these bridges and build those respectful relationships, which is it's a really, really valuable tool. So those valuable ones in your community, they may have, or in your agency or your community, they may have a role as, say, youth worker, as guardianship worker, but they're known in community. Let them go back to community to do their cultural activities as part of their work. It shouldn't be like confined by policies. Oh, 9 to 5, no, that doesn't work for us. Let them go. There's a tragedy in the community. I send my staff out, help them. Right? I don't care what it is. Let's just deal with this. That's how you build trust, and that importance of having people see you out there and your staff and knowing that they're going to be. I always say this, I expect my staff to laugh, cry, and celebrate with my nations, with our nations. That's what I expect.
Thank you so much. We just had another question come in here. So maybe we'll take this as the last question before we share the video to close us off in a good way here.
Okay.
Jackie is asking, what do you feel about applying for cultural law to legislation to put weight behind all cultural plans for a child in permanency planning? There are families that fall under the Bill C-92 legislation, but not being followed through to keeping a child connected to their Indigenous identity.
Oh, 100%. I absolutely agree. I think so. When you look at, that's why it is. So your purpose statement, when you first start drafting laws, your purpose statement is so important that you get that right, because a purpose statement is what then drives funding, legislation, or like the policies, the regulations, is that purpose statement. I'll give you an example. I use this as the easiest example. The Canada Health Act, the purpose of that Canada Health Act is to ensure every Canadian has healthcare. How do you do that? That's funding. That's through the federal transfer. All these other laws and pieces of legal instruments are then spurred on by that purpose statement that every Canadian has a right to healthcare. So our law, our purpose statement in our law is that every Carrick County child has the right to live up to their full potential. So what do they mean? Land, access to land, their culture, all of these pieces, so that we can make sure that that child, when within legislation, is connected to their culture. Our law is based on our potlatch law, which is our highest governance. So as a hereditary chief, being part of that lawmaking, developing all of that stuff is so important, because it is based in our law. Once you're a hereditary chief, you die a hereditary chief. Once you're Lakchabu clan, you'll die Lakchabu clan, Wolf clan. That cultural loss of that connection to that has to be embedded within your within C-92, albeit a Western system. We can ensure that there is those cultural laws that are brought to the forefront and maintained. And so there is that cultural connectivity from the child, the parents, to the land, to their culture.
I'd just like to add, it's really critically important that we have advocates like Jackie out in community, because they're holding systems accountable when they're advocating for our Indigenous youth. Those national standards found in Bill C-92 are embedded in the CFCSA in the province of British Columbia, and cultural, that those national standards are just the baseline. And if it wasn't for advocates such as Jackie, we're still seeing that people aren't being held accountable and reminded that this is law in Canada, in what we call Canada. So I think that's really important, that right now, Mary would say, we have to be the voice for the quietest little one, right? To ensure that culture is at the forefront of their well-being. Remember that the national standards are talking about sibling solidarity when we talk about the best interests of an Indigenous child. family connection to clan, culture, and language is also under the best interests of the Indigenous child, and safety. That means psychological safety, that means emotional safety, that means spiritual safety. So when we go into community and we go to advocate for those little ones as we're building those cultural plans, we're constantly reminding everybody that's supporting the circle how important that is. It's actually the law in Canada.
And I think that's really important. So when I was working on developing C-92 and we were developing the federal enabling legislation, I always had certain hills that I was going to die on. One was that cultural piece. The other, like, those national standards came about from us advocating to ensure that there was that understanding, that connection to a community and the culture and everything is imperative to a individual's success. It doesn't matter what culture they're coming from, but that continuity, and that's their right. And so always the time we're drafting this legislation, I'm always thinking, what did the residential school act do to try to obliterate us? What did colonization? And let's respond in kind with existing legislation. How do we get back to where we were? How do we get back to where we're healthy? So a lot of those things, even the priority of placement, all of those pieces with embedded in C-92 was there because I'm thinking, okay, well, we're thinking, Cindy and I were part of that legislative working group. How do we get our kids back to where they belong within the warm embrace of culture, clan, and community? So absolutely, we just have to hold judges and lawyers. That's why we had our Loving Justice conference, because judges and lawyers need to understand C-92 is the law of the land. So thanks for that comment, but definitely we always have to advocate. We always have to be the voice of those that don't have a voice. Okay.
What a beautiful message.
One more point, sorry, before we start, I just wanted to make sure that one of the things that I'd heard from some chiefs is that, while they're going about without the nations that aren't part of an agency, and they're getting services from MCFD right now, because that's who you can't be vacant in law. You need to have a law. So under the CFCSA, it is MCFD that's upholding the law for those nations that aren't part of an agency. Now, in that, there's funding disparities because the province doesn't fund the same level as on reserve, right? So in that case, what I've talking to this nation, and I think that we know this, but maybe people don't know this. But I think that while I have a captive audience here, that those grandparents aren't getting the same funding, even though their grandchild was removed on reserve, so they're federally funded. Grandparents are living in the urban setting. These children are now federally funded. Grandparents are barely getting anything. They don't have enough money to put the kid in skating, for example. Jordan's principle is taking too long. That the nation, if they did a protocol with the agency to provide service instead of MCFD, then those grandparents like that would have access to the prevention funding that the agency has right now, operations at actual cost, post-majority at actual cost, Jordan's principle, all of those things. So nations right now that aren't part of an agency as transitioning to getting to their own laws, that is you can do that. You can develop a protocol with the agencies that are close by instead of with MCFD. I know that the feds don't like us, and the feds don't like us saying that because then it's more cost to them. But it's something that people must need to know they're out there. And so I think our Children Our Way staff that's on here, we need to put an information sheet out on that.
Kai. Thanks, Mary. Kai, Lenore had mentioned, I like how you mentioned the well-being of the child also means the well-being of the staff providing the care for those children.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hopeful that there's work being done to protect our workers from systemic discriminatory environments within ministries. She gives the example of the roots workers and the social workers who identify as Indigenous within those systems. And all these programs and ministries do not implement, or all these programs do not implement under it. So for example, like leave, grievances, WorkSafe, and EI, it's important to note that British Columbia, it has adopted UNDRIP, DRIPA, here in the province. But I think it's a good segue to go into the video that we're going to show because it's talking about practicing different, it's talking about transforming systems that have systemically been harmful to Indigenous people.
And if there's any good ministry workers out there that are unhappy, just send them to me, I'll hire them. Good ones.
Thank you for that comment, Lenore.
child, this place is a part of you. You belong to it. We take care of this land, and the land will take care of you.
No, I'm not telling you.
I think of you above all, little one.
She's my kid.
Under Section 13, it's mandatory.
I hope to teach you and all the other children the goodness of this land. We have each other.
They are attached to your ovaries.
And others to help in the healing and rebuilding.
Only to give to you when you become a woman. When the people wait for you're going. Oh my God. I'm not very good at it, but I love it.
Help in reclaiming what has always been ours.
Custody. I'm so pleased.
You will adopt this vision too. And in your time on this earth, you will continue to fight against the injustice.
About 3. Yeah, is everything okay?
Stand strong for what you believe in, and speak for those who have no voice. Your message will be our light.
So thank you all for being here. I hope you enjoyed the video. And if there's any more questions or anything that you'd like to say, for sure, reach out to us or reach out to Our Children Our Way. Thank you to Our Children Our Way, Michelle, Kai, and the wonderful Jennifer Chakri and all the staff for the great work that you do. Again, those nations that are part of an agency, or even those nations that are, look at the Our Children Our Way site. There's a lot of good information. And thank you for giving us the privilege to be able to share this time with you, Masai. And thank you, Joni. Amazing.
Masai, everybody.
Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. And as Mary said, feel free to reach out to the Our Children Our Way Society with any questions that come up afterwards. Have a great day, everyone.